All right. Everybody ready? Good? All right. I'm going to read off my notes because if I don't, I will talk forever. A resilient field of study considers the history and future longevity of the academic conversations it produces. Through historical understanding of veteran studies and comprehension of how we collaborate with each other to produce meaningful scholarship, scholars of veteran studies will be able to progress in a more robust and impactful field of study. Speaker 1, Alexis Hart, professor of English and director of writing at Allegheny College, will review some defining moments of the nascent academic field over the last 2+ decades and ponder its current status and future prospects. Speaker 2, Corinne Hinton, associate professor of English at Texas A&M Texarkana, will identify some challenges and opportunities facing new voices in veterans studies and potential impacts on the field as a whole. Speaker 3, Micah C. Wright, me, program manager at the UT Health Science Center at San Antonio Military Health Institute, will assess the value of having academic conversations across various disciplines interested in veterans' issues, providing insight into the military veteran experience, including how those who serve veterans can best support the community. Speaker 4, Michael Hoffman, doctoral candidate at the University of Michigan, will consider how collectivist attitudes could be encouraged within the field of veteran studies to the benefit of the field and maybe even higher education itself. Each speaker will briefly present their ideas and will focus on sparking discussion with the audience. Questions are included at the end of each presentation. We will use these questions to guide our conversation after the presentations are finished. I can't say this enough. Our purpose of this roundtable is to spark discussion and talk about resiliency within the field of veteran studies. So I will now give the stage to our first presenter, Alexis Hart.
All right, thank you, Micah, for that introduction. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to ASU and all the folks who helped set this up. So again, as Micah said, we're not going to talk a whole lot, ideally. We're going to try to spark discussion. So the question that I began as I was talking with my fellow panelists was, okay, as Bruce mentioned and others have mentioned, right, we're a decade out from the first Veterans and Society Conference. So where are we as a field now, and what does resiliency look like? Can we maintain momentum in the current landscape of higher education? And I will be using higher education, again, as one of our colleagues here pointed out, right? We're in generalizations, right? Veterans is a generalization. Higher education is a generalization, right? The campus here in downtown ASU looks nothing like my tiny little campus in rural northwestern Pennsylvania, right? But we're just going to have to realize that, yes, we are talking in generalizations from time to time. Speaking of that, really, I'm coming at this, as my little footnote there says, I'm coming at this from my own personal and professional lenses, right? So these defining moments, as they are filtered through those lenses of mine. I'm a Navy veteran, so whoever said the Army was the best was wrong, but I'm also someone whose professional focus is rhetoric and writing studies and academic writing. So much of what I'm coming from is coming from those lenses. So like Bob, I also got out of active duty in 1999. So I resigned my commission as a Navy Supply Corps officer in 1999, started full-time in graduate school. At that time, that pearl had formed in my head. That grain of sand had turned into a pearl. I really didn't have a lot of sense of how I could think about my veteran experience, my military experience, alongside my academic experience. And then in the midst of my PhD examinations, literally that week, I had my first one on Monday, which was 9/10. The next day, Tuesday, before my third exam, was 9/11. That changed the landscape. And really was the impetus, I think, for many of us to think about, unlike many of our colleagues who came from the Vietnam era, where there really was a kind of a hush-hush, don't mention your veteran status, there was this upswell of folks within academia. I would say, if you don't know Wick Sloan's work in Inside Higher Ed, Wick Sloan works at Bunker Hill Community College in Boston. He has been an advocate for veteran representation and support throughout higher education. His first Inside Higher Ed column about veteran support came out in 2007. Next year, the GI Bill, the post 9/11 GI Bill, and we see that that really, again, is another upswell. So in 2009, my colleague Mike Edwards and I was a professor at the Virginia Military Institute at the time. He was a professor at the Army, at West Point. I forget the formal term for West Point. So we came together in our professional field at the Conference for College Composition and Communication, and we started this group, special interest group, writing with current, former, and future members of the military. From that, the next year, the president of 4Cs, Marilyn Valentino, made this call saying we have an ethical obligation to act responsibly to veterans in our classrooms. And this really was a call. She and Howard Tenberg, also both community college, two-year college association representatives at 4Cs, were really behind this. It began to move my professional community in the direction of thinking about this. My colleague and friend and co-researcher Roger Thompson and I really used that impetus of that ethical obligation to start doing our work. We received a 4Cs grant to do some of the work. But that same year in 2010, you can see a whole bunch of other things were happening. So, right, this is not just happening in classrooms or with student veterans, that has been my focus, but it's occurring, right, it was occurring in families as folks returned. It was occurring in the workforce, as we've heard from our last panel. It was occurring in politics. It was occurring in the medical field, right? So, so again, although my focus is very much on the academic side, there was an upswell happening throughout. Again, we've heard Travis Martin mentioned already. EKU started the first program, the minor in veteran studies, also in 2010. So what I'm calling a banner year here. Moving on, we see that there are commitments at bigger schools with more funding to start institutes like the one here at ASU, the one at Syracuse, Institute for Veterans and Military Families. We see Travis and some of his work again in the Military Experience in the Arts Journal comes out in 2011. Some of the first publications that start to collect a scholarship, academic scholarship about the post 9/11 wars come out. And then toward the end there, we have our first Veterans in Society conference at Virginia Tech. Moving on, this is, I don't know, the font here did not so sorry about that, but poor document design. My professional communication students can chide me. But 2013 is Rogers and my white paper came out. A few years later, the 4Cs had released the position statement on student veterans in classrooms. So again, we're starting to see movement. Victoria's here from NEH. NEH launched the Standing Together initiative in 2014. And many of us in this room, Nancy, Bruce, Eric, right, Mariana, who's on her way, Victoria, came together at Virginia Tech and had the institute, the Summer Institute. And we asked ourselves there, what is this field? Is it a field? Is it going to come together? What is this thing called veteran studies? Then the Journal of Veteran Studies came out in 2016, thanks in large part to Mariana's initiative, right? Her resilience, her repeating, going back again and again. And then in 2019, the Veteran Studies Association was established. And yet, we see this momentum, but in 2020, there's a piece in JVS that says that claiming that there is this field is premature. We haven't cohered into a tangible focus of study that exhibits the interdisciplinary nature and academic pedigree, right? So, and the predecessors here that are being called on are Black studies, women, gender, and sexuality studies, Indigenous peoples studies, right? These are fields, interdisciplinary fields, studies fields that have cachet, right? That have more than a single journal, that have programs that are majors, right? And not minors, that have graduate programs. So these are the questions I'm asking us to consider together today. Are we satisfied with minor programs and certifications for this field we're calling veteran studies? What is our pedigree, right? Are we starting to cohere? Is it really a truly interdisciplinary field? And then, right, we saw what caused the upswell. Now that combat operations have ceased, but also things that are happening in higher education, the Great Resignation. We're seeing certifications instead of, right, degree programs. We are seeing changes to the landscape of higher ed. What impacts are those gonna have on us as a field? So I'd like us to consider that together after the rest of my colleagues go through their presentations. So, thank you.
This is not designed for the short people. Gosh, I'm gonna get, no, I'm fine. Thank you though. Hi everybody, I'm Corinne Hinton. I'm currently an associate professor of English at Texas A&M University in Texarkana. And thanks to Alexis's wonderful presentation, I can now consider myself a banner year scholar. I started doing my dissertation research in 2010 to sort of, I think identity positioning is really helpful because we all come from different spaces here and have found our way into this field in different ways. So I was an Air Force brat. Both my parents served 20 years in the Air Force. And then I had 2 years of non-dependent status and went from a military child to a Marine wife. My husband served 20 years in the Marine infantry, served 4 combat deployments in the first 5 years we were married. And because of that sort of induction into the larger Marine family, I would have frequent conversations with his colleagues, many of whom were on their way out and thinking about what might be the natural course for them, which was going to school, finishing a degree, getting a degree, and then going on to a post-service employment. We're sort of struggling with how they might have that transition into, for them, what they viewed as an environment full of kids. And so that was difficult for them, and I found that challenge interesting. And so my dissertation work looked at particularly the transitional and writing transitional experiences of Marine student veterans leaving the Marines and then coming into their first year college composition courses. And from that work, I really haven't left veterans studies since. And now as I'm not quite a grandmother in the field at all, but still now, instead of thinking about just projects individually, but really thinking about the progress of the field as a whole, I titled my talk, even though I didn't really want to title it because it's a roundtable, but I found myself titling it, "Wait, Veteran Studies is a Thing?" ? Because field resilience begins with field awareness. So as a multidisciplinary field, veteran studies attracts emerging scholars from extensive thesis or dissertation work, and we've heard some of that already a little bit today, on relevant issues, as well as established scholars who find their way in to our field and our community. They are often inspired by their own personal teaching or research or military experiences, and these scholars contribute to veteran studies as a field, even if they aren't aware or claim that they are veterans studies scholars. And as a result, they're often disadvantaged by a lack of understanding that the field exists at all. The quantity and popularity of scholarship about our military-affiliated populations both perpetuates and hinders the resilience of our field when scholars lack awareness of or connection with the field at all. So I'd like to identify some challenges and opportunities that face new voices in veteran studies and potential impacts on the field as a whole, and then hear from others, those others being y'all, about as we consider the field's resilience through the perspective of long-term scholarly production. So one of the touting strengths of veteran studies has been, and Alexis pointed to this as well, is this notion of sort of interdisciplinarity, or maybe we mean multidisciplinarity, or maybe we mean transdisciplinarity. We don't know what we mean, and so because of that, it is a field that through its various opportunities and issues to explore, invites us to examine issues relevant to military veterans, current service members, and all the affiliated military populations through the lens of more than one more established pedigreed field. And so because of that, that collaboration is both an attractive opportunity and something worthwhile to pursue, but also can be limiting in some ways for those who are coming up through doctoral programs without an established graduate program from which to operate. And my colleague Michael is going to talk a little bit about that here soon. So I do believe that more opportunity is available to our field in terms of trying to gain true interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary work. So defining interdisciplinary as integrating knowledge and methods from different disciplines using a real synthesis of approaches, and that real synthesis of approaches is really sort of the linchpin there. The research process forces participants from unrelated disciplines to cross their disciplinary boundaries in order to take up an issue of study. Furthermore, in terms of transdisciplinary, which is often the most difficult to achieve, really seeks a unity of intellectual frameworks, and one could argue that veteran studies does not have a wealth of intellectual frameworks from which we operate. We are often applying other disciplines' frameworks to our problems or issues of study, and that creates some complications for the field. So active service members, veterans, military-affiliated individuals, military families, and other populations produce myriad experiences and challenges and opportunities in areas of inquiry that are available for study from any number of existing disciplinary perspectives. So exploring, understanding, problem-solving, serving, and supporting real people or the cultural representations thereof, experiencing the real or imagined world in unique ways is at the heart of many of the theoretical and practical disciplines that we use when we are doing veterans studies. As such, the diverse areas of interest under the banner of veterans studies attracts emerging scholars conducting extensive thesis or dissertation work. And so this often can hinder those very same scholars trying to essentially put their foot in the door through creating doctoral dissertations. So for example, just between 2019 and 2022, so we're past what Alexis sort of points out as our first sort of wave of post 9/11 work in this field, but just in from 2019 to 2022, and 2022 isn't over yet last time I checked, there are over 15,000 dissertations that examine transitional experiences of service members or veterans into higher education, into post-service employment, into civilian life generally, into post-service healthcare, or a combination thereof. And whether they categorize this research as reintegration, re-entry, reacculturation, or simply as transition, these experiences continue to raise interest among emerging scholars from several academic areas. Most of this work generates from doctoral programs in education, including educational administration, education leadership, organizational leadership, educational policy, as well as business and management, which also includes public administration and organizational leadership, depending on how the school is divided. It includes a lot of work from the social and behavioral sciences, predominantly in clinical psychology and counseling, and health sciences from nursing, occupational therapy, etc. And finally, from public administration and public policy, and then a smattering of us from the humanities. So scholarly interest in our military-affiliated populations hasn't slowed in the way that we might have expected it to slow after post 9/11, or from the troop drawdowns and then the formal conclusions of our post 9/11 conflicts in 2011 and 2014, respectively. But we also have a youth of formally constructed veteran studies programs, and Alexis talked about several of these, the certificate programs, minor programs, and one full undergraduate program that are available at institutions like EKU, at St. Louis University, at UCI, University of Utah, here at ASU. Their current limitations to undergraduate education means that support for doctoral candidates exploring these issues are often left without expert faculty to guide them. In fact, they often don't have the specialized knowledge within veteran studies as a field to point these doctoral candidates to expert faculty who can mentor them and who can guide them into a field that does in fact exist and has a growing, robust set of scholarship from which to work. These limitations include the lack of field awareness by their dissertation supervising faculty, which then turns and passes that same lack of awareness to the candidates they supervise, as well as structural barriers that prevent external faculty who may be experts from serving on those committees. I faced this same issue in my own doc program when I started my dissertation in 2010, and without a community generated by the interest group at SEAS that Alexis was talking about, I could have easily spent more time working within veteran studies without even knowing I was doing it. Not all fields have probable connections with military-affiliated special interest groups or special populations. So in addition to the SEAS standing group within rhetoric and composition, we might also add the Military and Veterans SIG within the Association for Behavioral Analysis International, or NASPA's Veterans Knowledge Community, the Research with Service Members, Veterans, and Military Families SIG within the Society for Social Work and Research, military-based medicine groups within medical education, and the Veterans Interest Network with the American Counseling Association, just to name a few, but there are some academic and research organizations where they either break down their areas of interest relative to a particular condition. So for example, in the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, there are special interest groups categorized based on things like suicide and PTSD, and not necessarily coupled within the populations that the populations that are impacted. And these categorizations may make it difficult for scholars to find each other and to build community. So in short, veteran studies in 2016, we were asking ourselves, is this a field? And I think in 2022, we are still asking, are we a field? And if we do, we may still have a marketing problem. So my provocative question is, what might we do proactively to connect new and established scholars to the wider veteran studies community, rather than expecting folks will casually find us through conferences and the website? Thank you very much.
So the concept of resiliency for journals can be observed in the types of participation that create longevity for the publication. The varying types of participation provide ample opportunity for scholars to contribute to ongoing scholarship. The Journal of Veteran Studies has been accepting submissions since 2016. Building resiliency early, the journal's publication record has been diverse. This diversity has provided ample opportunity for those interested in veterans to publish, creating and joining different scholarly conversations. As Figure 1 shows, up here, this wonderful pie chart, the types of publications vary, with an emphasis on research and scholarly articles. Additionally, book reviews and program profiles bolster the journal's resiliency through a review of larger scholarly contributions and programmatic solutions to problems facing veterans and society. Although this diversity creates longevity through participation for the journal, the types of authored publications likewise illustrate resiliency. Scholarly collaborations provide avenues for the Journal of Veteran Studies to illustrate diverse perspectives. Publishing research and articles from a number of different academic disciplines, this journal reveals the participation of different disciplines, highlighting a diversity of focus in veteran studies. Figure 2, this also awesome graphic up here, shows the difference between 1, 2, and multiple author submissions. Fairly even. Collaborative work since 2016 have outnumbered slightly single author publications. The sheer number of collaborations shows an important focus on a type of work that creates resiliency. Although I am not taken away from single author publications, I know we all write them and all need to write them, I am arguing that a continued focus on collaboration, as well as the types of collaborations, will provide the Journal of Veteran Studies the resiliency needed for longevity. So really 2 collaborations that I thought as beneficial, but hopefully within our conversation, we can talk about other collaborations, especially those that you are already in or planning on doing. But the first one is collaboration with student veterans and military-affiliated students is key to fully understanding their experiences in the military at the university or college and within the society as a whole. Jacqueline Lynn Chua and Lacey Jo Evans in collaborative research between student veterans and faculty in higher education advocate for collaboration with student veterans as co-researchers. And that's an important distinction. They argue the inclusion of traditionally underrepresented military veteran researchers in academic knowledge production about their experiences, priorities, and concerns can have wide-ranging implications. These implications are linked to the different connections faculty researchers and their student veteran counterparts have to the research, purpose, methods, and outcomes. These collaborations not only increase the diversity of perspectives in our research, but they also provide additional opportunities for veterans to find their own agency, contributing knowledge on the academic field that seeks to study them. Partnering with community supporters in research provides direct links to the support that is provided to veterans. These supporters exist as not-for-profit organizations, university departments and centers, as well as government entities that all engage with veterans and military-affiliated students. Excuse me. Research that involves these organizations defines the efficacy of the support that is provided. For example, Daniel Lauber, Stephen Estes, and Michael Schur research the activities of Operation Song, a not-for-profit that teaches veterans the art of songwriting. They illustrate the efficacy of the program by interviewing participants. Their findings showed both the efficacy of the not-for-profit and the limitations of the research, pointing to a potential strengths of a future study and also strengths of the program itself. Other research, like Keith Tidball and Maura Tidball, also conducted research on a veterans program entitled Wounded Warriors in Action. They surveyed participants in the program's outdoor recreation, finding an emphasis was placed by the veterans on the program's focus on food motivation. This result can be utilized in both future studies and programmatic planning for other veterans organizations. Collaborating with community partners provides scholars an opportunity to engage with organizations that readily work with military-affiliated populations. These collaborations can result in a refined focus on how the programmatic needs for veterans are discovered. So just a few questions to kind of think about is what types of collaborations are you currently looking for in veteran studies? You know, is there something that you're wanting to do that you feel will strengthen your own research or strengthen the journal and the field of study in particular? What collaborations would help you innovate in research? And how can these different types of collaborations bolster the resiliency for the Journal of Veteran Studies? I could be wrong. Collaboration could be the old thing. I don't know. But we need to think about what types of collaborations specifically work to bolster that resiliency. And how can we successfully integrate voices of military-affiliated students as collaborators, not just part of the study, but co-researchers in the research itself? Thank you.
All right. Do me a favor while I'm getting the PowerPoint switched over. Take a look at your feet, figure out where your coffee cup, your water is at. All right, great. Everybody stand up. Stretch. All right, thank you very much. I have absolutely no idea where the play button is on this thing. That one down there? Mm-hmm. Really? Why would you put it there? It's a terrible place for it. All right. Hi, my name is Michael Hoffman. I am an Army veteran. I am a doctoral student finishing up my dissertation at the University of Michigan in the Joint Program in English and Education, and mostly I'm a teacher. I'm going to tell you a bit of a story, partly as a way of modeling a response to what my colleagues said, hopefully a suggestion of the kind of discussion that we're looking for in a moment, and partly because storytelling is how I make sense of things that are troubling me. My dissertation started as a sidebar comment. I'd written a short reflection in a course in writing studies, which is my home discipline. In the reflection, I mentioned my own writing habits. I blogged during each of my deployments to Iraq. The instructor for that course, who also happened to be my advisor in the program at the time, wrote in the margin, "Soldiers in writing, what a study that would make. It's a shame you weren't working on your PhD back then." Well, it's never too late, right? So I set aside everything else I'd been thinking about as a possibility for my dissertation, picked up that. That comment really stuck with me. Fast forward a year. As my literature review was growing, it seemed to me that there was and still is a need for scholarly work that addresses this fundamental question: what is it like to serve in the military? Veteran identity is intricately linked to military experience, but often the situational needs of veterans in the VA healthcare system, in the job market, in a college classroom, become the focus of the research, and the military experience, the predicate for the veteranness of the study, becomes taken for granted, overlooked sometimes. Well, it should be taken for granted. It's part of being a veteran. But a veteran of what? Nearly everyone I've worked with, especially outside veteran studies, tends to have their own notion of what it means to be a veteran, their own definition. That often precludes the possibility of asking veterans what it meant to them to serve back then, today, and asking veterans what questions they have about how their service matters. Make sure I didn't, there we go. So while I was trying to figure out how to address what I perceived as a gap in the literature, I was also struggling to figure out where I belong. I still am. The research question that I started with, what is it like to serve in the military, it's not a writing studies question. It's not a social work question. It's not really a student affairs question, or a question that obviously belongs to any of the many disciplines, all of which share a concern for veterans. But it still strikes me as the question that is most essential to veteran studies. I'd like to say that what I was doing was interdisciplinary, maybe even transdisciplinary, as Corinne described them, but honestly, I was one guy, wandering alone across disciplinary lines, trying to make good choices about adopting theories, methodologies, methods outside of my home field. It wasn't inter or trans anything. It was just lonely. But, like the man says, not all who wander are lost. This room is where I belong. This is home for me. And I'm really grateful to that and grateful to my colleagues in front of me for inviting me into this panel today. I'd like to give a little bit back from my own research. So, for what it's worth, we, and now I'm transitioning from the we of scholarship to the we of veteran, we trained. We spent nearly all of our time learning how to be the next thing that the military required of us, whether or not we ever deployed to combat. We all prepared for combat. That training, the skills and the process, are what veterans share. But when I asked my study participants what they remember, at least those veterans that spoke to me at length about their service, what they remembered were the relationships, the people, the folks on their right and their left. Why is that? I would suggest that the training that was accomplished, it was accomplished by setting ethical standards, relational norms, that were formative for many of us. How we think about our relationship with others was changed by our service and remains changed after we leave service. To understand how veterans see relationships, we need to better understand how military training forms or reforms service members' expectations. I want to make a couple of big statements here. Feel free to interrogate me later today if you're skeptical. The U.S. military expresses its expectations through regulation. Military regulations are adaptive. They reflect the constantly shifting behavioral needs of a group of people who together prepare for war. But those behavioral needs are always enacted. What I mean by that is those relational attitudes are created through action that service members are required to take for themselves and for one another. We learn how to do what we do. I'm Army, so I just use the verb to soldier. We learn how to soldier, and we learn how to expect what others do when they soldier with us. Regulation and relationship are interconnected, and it's the specificity of the actions that service members take that form the bonds that many veterans tell us are never duplicated in civilian life. One key expectation is this: that relationship starts with action, not what you profess to feel about others, but what you do for others. I'll give you a simple example. You can order people to respect officers in the military. It's what you do that creates the respect. So, I want to pause there and consider for a moment. How do we, veteran studies now, as a field, define our goals? What do we want to do for ourselves, for each other, in the long run? What actions do we take to build community? Let's be ambitious. Do we want, for instance, veterans to reintegrate into social life, or do we want a civil society that reintegrates with its veterans, that has an obligation to its veterans to meet them where they are, rather than simply expect veterans to meet civilians where they are? Another big question: are our disciplinary expectations helping us or hindering us? I'll give you a hint. As a graduate student, being expected to stay within one discipline and pursue what I think needs to be pursued is really difficult. My department gave me leave to do it, or possibly they just decided it was easier to ignore me until I went away. Hopefully, for me at least, with a doctorate in my hand. And one question that I think all of us need to grapple with, that I'm going to use to lead into a broader question session, so that we understand what we mean to each other. What is it like to work in veteran studies? What is it like for each of you to be part of it, to contribute to it, to get something from it, and give something back to it? All right, we're going to switch into the discussion section. I'm going to give a quick opportunity for any of my colleagues if they would like to reiterate their own questions at this point. Or go.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Dr. Rebecca Ivory. I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I have my doctorate, and I work with Tier 1 operators, and that is all I do, them and Navy SEALs, and that's it. And I wanted to speak to what Corinne was talking about and also what Micah was talking about, because I kind of want to share a quick story because I think it illustrates exactly what you were talking about. So my husband's active duty. We used this post-9/11 GI Bill to pay for my doctorate. The first program I went to, my husband and I were like, awesome, I have access to military bases, I know the military community, I really want to work with the military. I came up with this great idea, that I wanted to do a community engagement project with Navy SEALs. And someone kind of gave the idea to me. I ran with it. I created a whole framework. I was on a full ride scholarship. I had a huge stipend. I was going to be teaching. I was living my dream. I took it to my 3 advisors and said, this is what I want to do. Here's my plan. It's not out there in literature. They literally put their hands on their hips and laughed at me and said, who do you think you are? No one's ever going to listen to you. I made the SpongeBob meme, about it, but I left and went to another doctoral program so that I could do that. And I personally know other people who have tried to go through doctoral programs like myself, who are nurses and medical professionals who are just shut down constantly, especially other military spouses and veterans, and are just told, well, of course you can't do that. Why would you ever want to do that? What are you trying to do? Change the world, kind of thing. So what I ended up doing is going to University of Delaware. I'm going to give them a plug here. They have in their graduate school of nursing, they have a huge veteran and military spouse faculty population. And I went there, they took me in. I was excited to be there. I did my doctorate. I got earned my nurse practitioner license in psych. But I ended up doing a community-based participatory research. And to Micah's point, I think that is personally where we should be going. I'm in the process of being hired by a major university to teach there because they are really interested in my research. And I'm going to a huge nursing program that everyone's heard of. I don't want to mention the name necessarily because I haven't signed with them yet. But they literally do not have a single veteran or veteran scholar in their entire nursing program in their faculty. And I asked them. And that's why they're interested in bringing me in, because they want people in the program who can speak to this veteran's stuff. And personally, I plan to bring community engagement and community-based participatory research to that nursing school because my project, I worked with a group of Navy SEALs and former Navy SEALs, and I treated trauma symptoms and chronic pain together at the same time, and it was like wildly successful because before I did anything else, I talked to like 70 SEALs and asked them, what are the issues in your community? What are things that I could help tackle as a nurse? How do you want them tackled? And what things are of interest to you? What would actually be acceptable to your community? And they were so enthusiastic about working with me. And I personally think that's why my project was successful because they already bought into the project because it was basically created by them and for them and with their input. And to me, my husband, active duty, people come in and talk to him all the time about what they should be doing and how they should be doing things. He's a tactical aviator, he's a fighter pilot. They always have new helmets, they have all this new stuff, and they're just being told, this is what you need. And no one ever asks them what they need, But community-based participatory research, yeah.
That's definitely fair. I think, everybody hear me? Do I need the microphone? All right, we're good. I definitely agree. I think community-based programs, community-based research is so impactful. My first introduction to doing anything in veteran studies was being a veteran at Texas State University, I guess another plug for a university, as a graduate student, and I was kind of the grumpy veteran. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I just wanted to go do my thing and go home, and then somebody asked me, gave me the opportunity, well, how would you serve veterans here? What would you do? Can you show us? And they made me a partner in it, and we built a program that was really successful with a bunch of different people. And I think being able to expand that and think about, especially as researchers in the field, how to even go to existing organizations. There are over 40,000 veteran service organizations nationwide, right? So being able to go out there and really show that impact, I think is great.
And the key was you said research with, right? Not research on.
They were my partners. I led it, they were my partners.
Yeah, that's great. Any other questions?
Sure.
You know, what I hypothesize is that the commonality is all of us want to do something good for the veteran community with our research. You know, we could have chose any topic to do research on, and like one of my other peers on the panel was saying, you could devote your whole entire life to one small little topic, right? So for you know, a scholar to go down that veteran studies path, ultimately I think that, you know, the intrinsic motivation there is to do something good for the veteran community. Whether they're a veteran themselves, or whether they have somebody in their family that's a veteran, or just see the lack of, you know, research literature that exists out here. They want to get back, you know, which was similar to what I found in my research. And then a collaboration idea, I think veteran scholars collaborating with active duty scholars, because there's a lot of active duty students, and there's a lot of veteran students. So that collaboration would be a good collaboration, you know, with soldiers or units, you know, really trying to find out what the active duty community needs research on, and partnering with those veteran scholars that can help them practical applications, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it's a really great idea too, you know. So I work for the Military Health Institute. We facilitate Department of Defense research for our faculty. And for military health, tons of research out there, tons of collaborations that you can do with it. But I think it'd be interesting to figure out how to foster that same thing, DoD support for, you know, veteran studies and working especially with units, directly with units, trying to find that.
I wonder if a graduate program would be useful for a couple of reasons. One of the points that Alexis made was the lack of having an intellectual framework. I think a lot of that work can be done in dissertations and graduate programs. You're also not going to have the same pressure to bring in the number of students in a graduate program that you have in an undergraduate major, for example. And then the other rationale would be having a place where people like us who are interested in this topic could actually go, so they don't run into issues when they go into a graduate program and doing a dissertation about that particular department not being aware of this particular issue. So I think maybe that could be an interesting next step.
So like a graduate program in veteran studies?
Something like that.
So one of the ideas I've been kicking around with for VSA, that's the Veteran Studies Association, is this idea sort of a graduate student consortium. So where there are doctoral degree holding faculty in veteran studies, so that if we have graduate students who are interested in doing dissertation work and they're looking for, even if it's an unofficial advising capacity, right? Because again, sometimes based on the school, you can't have an external member sitting on a committee, but you have somebody who's in the field, closer to the field, to sort of go to, whether it's in a formal or an informal mentorship component. The only trouble, right, is it sounds great, but then how do you get them there, right? It may, if we're suffering from a lack of understanding that there are people out there, like your people are out there, go find them, right? And it's like Google, how to do veteran studies, right? And so part of that is also what I try to do is when I go to non-veteran studies conferences and forums, I talk to people about veteran studies. I educate my colleagues on other system campuses about the work that we do, so that when somebody says, you know what, I have a doctoral student who's interested in doing something veterans related, who do you think she should talk to? I can say, I know who that person should talk to. Which means we need to be talking to our non-veteran studies colleagues as often as we are talking to each other. Probably more. I'm not calling hands and coffins.
I have to give your hand up first.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of build on this as well. You know, there's maybe an argument for like a fellowship model, you know, for folks that are in sort of like informal spaces that are doing this work for their community, right, that aren't backed by any sort of like university. You know, opening myself up to, you know, the community, the veterans community, in doing the work that I've done. I found a number of people that are, you know, students, either undergrads that are just kind of doing this on their own. This is where they see the need, right? And I mean, there are VSOs that do this too, right? It's like, this is where we see the need, this is where we have expertise, let's do something. And I think doing some sort of fellowship with a university where we can, have folks apply to this and then apply a little bit of like formality to it and, dedicate some researchers to this to build the field. Not just depending on sort of like mid-career scholars or early career scholars, but to actually go out to the people that are doing the work on the ground that might not be just doing it as far as like a research as much as this is a need that's unmet that I can help with, and pairing them with scholars in the field to make this more formalized, right? And then to incubate some of these projects and make them bigger.
I would just say just that, right, going back to, right, the landscape of higher education, we do these things because we want to do good, right? But we're also giving up things, and at some point, I think, you're talking about support. Some of that support may need to be a course release, right? Something monetary that can bolster this, because for too long, too much of work has been done on, we do this because we're drawn to it, because we're, right? And folks are starting to break, right? So I just wanted to point that out.
We have a couple hands up there.
I was just going to say the non-veterans networking is super important, because at the end of the day, and I don't have the answer to this, of course, but minors and veterans studies have failed. We've seen them at campuses and then they fall apart. There's not enough students. So in leadership, you're not going to get that support if you only have 3 students in this veterans minor. So you have to have that non-veterans involved. It doesn't matter if they're in psychology or whatever it is, to keep these programs alive. So I feel like that is a part that you have to do on your campus, because you might only have 50 veterans depending on the size of your campus. How do you maintain a veteran studies program on your campus when you only have 50, but you have to branch out and just explain why people should get involved, right?
Yeah, and so I'll put a plug in for Rod to my article, right? We talk about why veterans only is not sustainable, right? And veteran affiliated also, right? But if we talk about veteran friendly, right, that's more inclusive, right? You can have, it could be 6 degrees of separation, right? But bringing in, there are many of us in this room and in this field have connections, right? But there are others who have come to this because there's been someone in their class, right? Or there's been someone in their community. So yeah, so that inclusiveness is important. Yeah, so thank you for that.
Yeah, I definitely agree too, because I think, veterans, I hate to hyperbolize the group, especially after some comments earlier, but we've probably all had issues before engaging with veterans, or rather getting veterans to engage with what we're doing. To this day, if somebody asks me to volunteer, my knee-jerk reaction is to hide my hand, because that's what I did when I was a lance corporal. But there's such applicability to other fields for non-veterans to have a minor or certification in veteran studies, because they're going to encounter veterans whether they like it or not, especially in the healthcare field, like where I work. There's a lot of interest, and I agree selling that interest to the non-veteran population is really important.
Just to ask a question, this is a really fascinating topic. Thank you to the panel for this discussion. And this is my first time attending the conference, so I'm listening to what you're saying. To me, it's an argument fascinating crosswalk between literature, business, the clinical, and medical world. I just wanted to ask, is there much of that going on with the traditional history programs? That's more of my reference point, but I know there's a lot of scholarship that's focused recently in the history lane. I'm thinking of Brian Jordan's book, Marching Home, about Civil War veterans, or Michael Gambo's Greatest Generation talks about really fascinating historical books, but the same lessons to American society about that, how we treat veterans. And just wondering what the group, have there been any successful collaborations with history programs?
Well, I will say that at Virginia Tech, we had at the NEH summer seminar, we had a ton of historians there. But again, it's this, the question, are we coherent, right? And that's part of the rub. But
I know, so when I, as a UTSA, we worked with Humanities Texas, which is an organization that Michael can probably explain better than I can, but it was in collaboration with the history department, and they were a big run for that, and it was really English department as well, because it was literature, reading memoirs from veterans and history of veterans and trying to understand the veteran experience. So that was a good collaboration. Do you have anything else to say on that?
Yeah, and the rock star of that one was the St. Crispin's Day speech.
Yeah.
You know, that's the one everybody kind of gravitates towards. But there was also the project on that was focused on women veterans. It was the Women Veterans Voices. The history department was kind of collecting archives of those stories and things like that. Activities like that, just because they exist, are going to create engagement for the issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd say to answer your question too about history from sort of a disciplinary perspective, right? I think history probably more than most other singular disciplines have a longer academic history and tradition related to intersectionality with military history. There are multiple journal avenues for historians who study, and obviously not just US-based, right, but the military largely, particularly international sections of military, whether it's a particular period of military history, right? It has a much longer trajectory than veteran studies does as a multi-trans interdisciplinary field. And so because of that, I have often found, not necessarily, I wouldn't categorize it as resistance, but what I would say is they have their own playground, and so they often don't want to come play with our playground because they have, and their playground has much nicer equipment sometimes. It's not that thing that you swing on and you hold on to for dear life and you don't crack your head on. It's a bit, you know, but we get folks that are interested and they know about us and they sort of come over and are interested in more collaborative projects. And I think we see moments of isolation in that, whether it's through something like the NEH projects and things like that. But yeah, I wouldn't say they're a tough nut to crack, but they've got a lot of their own stuff. We're a little bit jealous.
Is history your wheelhouse?
Yes.
He's like, I don't want to raise my hand now. I don't want to
Yes,
say
you
it.
know, I come from a hybrid background too, so I'm perceptive to several of these different focus areas.
So as you were listening to what's been said so far, where would you want to fit in?
I don't think from an academic standpoint, I can say I represent that traditional history community. So I don't think I can really give the best answer to how that would fit in. But I am fascinated with, because of my own cross-sectional background, of the different things and how veteran studies fits in.
So we used to not be man orphans?
Well, I mean, it's not right. I mean, the Edwards Academy has had more literature in the arts for a long time, right? And there are literature folks who are like, you know, why would I be in veteran studies, right? I mean, William Corley, love him, came to the NEH, right? He was pushing back, right? Like, why would I move out of my, right? I'm a literature person, right? So there are tensions for sure, yeah. I've actually graduated from the Eastern Kentucky University back in May with my veteran studies certificate and my occupational science degree. And I kind of like fell into that veteran studies. When I went to college, it wasn't like what I set out to do, but we just got these like lists of electives, and I just kind of like randomly picked it from a list and then ended up loving it. And then now I'm in graduate school getting my occupational therapy doctorate. And I really enjoyed the whole like veteran studies program. And I've talked to Dr. Martinell, like I really wish there was like a graduate like certificate. Because like with my degree I couldn't do like a minor or anything, but like but I've been asked so many times, they're like, are you a veteran? And I'm like, no, and then they're like, what's the point? And then I'm like, I have to like explain, you know, just because you're not a veteran doesn't mean you can't learn about the culture and like learn how to be a better, you know, it's helping be a better me, you know, be able to interact with veterans in a better way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what would be
really cool, and this may exist, and I apologize if I just don't know that it exists, but like a list of where certificates are and those options, because I know that they exist. Like, I didn't know that there was one at the university, for example. I think being able to show, especially as it grows, would be a good, going back to marketing veteran studies, would be a good way to show that this is a thing, like this actually works. And we can implement it at different universities.
Well, there's a lot of incremental work that has to be done. So far, as a librarian, though I used to be a political science professor, I've been on 2 PhD committees at Tech, and the third one hasn't been some paperwork done eventually. As sort of a chronic outsider, but weirdly connected to a lot of things, I think there's a lot to be said for trying to gauge what are the requirements in terms of institutional culture at a university for a PhD program, where it might not be veteran studies, but there can be some broad church PhD programs. For example, one of the departments that I work with at Virginia Tech is, well, it used to be called Science and Technology in Society. It's not all made by reformed engineers who are doing that. Again, it's very much from the beginning, and this is something Jim Dubinsky, who wasn't able to attend the conference, was our other co-founder of the whole VIS initiative. It was an act of genius to think about that in precisely, thank you so much for your remarks, to say it is this connection. Part of the connection that we can do, though, and this is why our commitment with the proceedings from the first conference is make them open access. So yes, you can Google to find those. From the beginning, JVS is an open access, no author charges, but still peer reviewed. It's a major cost to the University Libraries at Virginia Tech, which hosts the production side. But it's a bestseller. So when you think about that part of the marketing, think about how in your little author blurbs you might say, and is a graduate of a certificate program, or is a former director of a certificate program, so that the existence of such programs, or majors or minors or whatever, is there. They're all searchable. But make sure in how you represent your work, you can suggest the greaterness, the greater scope, the pan-disciplinarity of the various slices of what we do, we call veteran studies.
Search engine optimization.
I appreciate the comment where you start with incremental change. Just to give a little bit more background that I left out of the presentation earlier, when I started writing about veterans, I started off with writing about blogging, military bloggers. I ran into a larger issue with my probable committee members, is that they each had their own notion of what a veteran was, and it depended on whether they came from women and gender studies or disability studies, or from rhetoric and composition. Actually, rhetoric and composition didn't really have any serious notions one way or the other about what veterans were like. And I ran into this bigger question, which is there really wasn't a good answer in the literature to point them to if they wanted to know more about what it's like to be in the military. I could point them to war novels, but most of us don't serve in a war. Even during wartime, a lot of service members never deploy, which means that combat is not the common denominator of being a veteran. It's something else. But getting at that turned out to be really complicated because it's nobody's question, and I did say this earlier. I ended up with a committee that has people from the education program, the English department, the School of Social Work, and the School of Medicine.
because I needed opinions from a wide variety of people. They've been a really great committee, but it comes at a certain cost to me because I'm nobody's anymore. If I were to go on the market, anybody in English and education is going to ask me about my dissertation, and the next question is going to be, no, seriously, what did you do with your dissertation? And I don't mind, even though that may sound like I do. I don't really mind, but it is a cost that I had to take into account when I decided to wander off into the problem that every academic field expects its dissertations to be produced solely within that field.
So I'm a social worker candidate, PhD candidate, psychologist. But the reason I mention that is because my profession has had this same conversation for over 100 years. What is a social worker? How is that a profession? If anybody's interested, look up Abraham Flexner's 1915 speech about his social work profession, and this is how he ended up with social work PhDs. It has also caused some problems. And one thing that has happened in my experience as a social worker, I work at the VA now, I've worked with veteran organizations before that, is that one thing we commonly overlook when we talk about veterans is that this population has more opportunities than most other populations that are studied, right? So social work, most of my colleagues are not working with veterans in the military community. And so when they talk about homelessness, suicide, substance abuse, those kinds of things, they don't have the same kinds of resources to address those issues. However, we do, right? When I teach students of social work about working with veterans in the military, I make sure to highlight that if someone comes in and they say that they're a veteran and they're homeless, you immediately have an extra toolbox that most other people don't have, right? So we don't have to only take a justice approach to our research and our interventions as a field of study, right? We can also talk about what opportunities are on the horizon because we have this population, because this population has social capital, and at the current moment, in the parlance of most of this audience, people give a shit, right? We could use that momentum at this point to say, not only how do we prevent suicide, but how do we take, to Dr. White's presentation, right? How do we take these people that have been in the military and make business better? How do we create more entrepreneurs? How do we, create the future based on these people's experiences and the resources they have at their fingertips? Not only because they're in the military, but because they capitalize on the rehab, VA home loan, those kinds of things, that'll free them up essentially to do other things.
Yeah, I want to clap. I really like that answer. I told a couple of universities before, like, we don't always have to talk about veterans as at a deficit way. Like, we can talk about them and what they can contribute. And I think hopefully that's where our field goes, right? So I'm in violent agreement with you. I definitely think that's exactly where it should go. Although I would say, talking about social work, I've worked with social work departments, mainly at Texas State, and then psychology department at UTSA, and they were always very active in veteran studies. But the thing that I would love to see collaboration on has to do with coordination of services. Because although there's a wealth of resources out there for veterans, translating that to veterans sometimes is lost in translation. So I think I'm pushing towards research towards that.
I would like to add that the discussion, it always reminds me of the scene from the Hurt Locker when he's in that cereal aisle staring at all the different cereals and he gets overwhelmed. But it's more than just providing a palette of services available to the veterans, but it's also teaching the veterans agency and self-advocacy. And I think that's where we need to emphasize the concept of cross-cultural instead of just cultural competency. Because veterans are coming from an environment where a lot of things are very prescriptive, including interventions. And, somebody mentioned earlier, your squad leader telling you to go to dental and things like that. And sometimes veterans don't react so well that for the first time, probably in a long time, having that kind of agency. We see that in some is, yes, identify the interventions, yes, identify the support structures, but also teach the veterans how to be able to vet those things, part of the fun. How to vet those things appropriately and to make informed decisions about which ones they would like to use more than others, and how to engage non-veterans when trying to advocate for themselves. And so I think that's, when we talk about what is it like to work in veteran studies, half the conversation is missing in a lot of cases, which is what do we need to do to support the veterans, but what do we need to do to teach the veterans to support themselves in the new world?
I think that goes back to Michael's, right? Like, who's fitting the film? It's got to be a both and, right? We've got to think about the veterans, right, moving into the civilian, but we've got to think about the civilians, thinking about the veterans too, right? So that the misconceptions that, folks in higher ed, or lack of conception that folks in higher ed may have of the veteran and military experience, right, has to also be coupled with what's the veteran and military preconception of higher ed, right?
My dad told me a story about when he was in the Army in Vietnam. Paymaster would come around once a month, bring out a cash box and a list. It says how much each service member in that unit is supposed to be paid. The unit lines up from the lowest ranking service member to the highest ranking service member in the company. And each person gets paid in order. And if any person in that line has any problems with how much they're getting paid, i.e. the number's wrong, the whole line stops right there. Is that really such a bad thing? To make people who are higher up on the food chain responsible for the lowest members of the unit in that kind of way? No company today would do that. No company today would suggest that if any of your team members' paychecks are screwed up, you don't get paid until you have helped them fix their problem. But that kind of interdependency is normal in the military. One of the people on my committee, when I described this, described it as codependency. I bristled, and I stepped out of the room for a little while, and I walked around, and then I came back and continued the conversation. What service members come to regard as dependable, as interdependent, is radically different than nearly all of American society. The military is probably the most collectivist institution, stuck in the middle of the most individualist nation on earth. It is an enormous cultural change. And I got to admit, I'm not really inclined to believe that it's a deficit change, going from the collectivist to the individualist in this case. Service members are used to looking out for each other, and I will grant, this doesn't happen all the time. The military can set up parameters, individuals can mess up the parameters themselves can be messed up. So I'm not suggesting the military is some sort of relational utopia. But there are ways in which service members come to depend on each other, which are stripped away from them instantly when they leave the service. And most of them aren't aware that that happens. They aren't aware that, a lot of times when service members talk about what it is like to leave the military, or more precisely, what it is they bring when they leave the military, they talk about discipline. Civilians tend to immediately translate that to the idea of self-discipline. But the military doesn't really work like that. If I need to be at PT at 6 o'clock in the morning on Monday, I'm not just there because I'm tough enough and I can remember and I set an alarm. I'm there because several other people are going to be banging on my door before I'm late. Because the people that should have been banging on my door, if they didn't, they're going to get hemmed up before I ever do. They're going to get in way more trouble than I do if I'm not there for that PT session. Because I know that all the people out there depend on me to be there. And because I know it matters to them, that they see me out there and see me doing what they are also expected to do. And that is the enactment that I mentioned earlier. It is the constant being able to see that the people around you can be counted on not merely to say that they have your back, but to demonstrate their capability to do so. That is an enormous cultural change for a lot of people from the military, And, you know, I got your soapbox if you need it back later. Done.
That's good. Any other questions? We're good, we're getting
about
close.
to get the, yeah.
We're up.
We're gonna get
Getting
the hook.
off stage.
Getting the hook, y'all. Let's hear it for our panelists. We are right on schedule, everyone. Thank you so much for your participation and questions. A couple of housekeeping notes. Obviously, we're in a living, working space. We're anticipating that as we continue on the event, that as we get closer to sundown, we're going to see fewer interruptions of students. We thank you for your patience and attention. Also, if any of my fellow Marines have stolen the edible crayons from this arrangement up here, please, I'm looking for the red ones. 15 minutes, y'all. We'll see you back then. Thank you.